The Paris Salon, established in the late 17th century, was a central part of French artistic life for the best part of 200 years. The first part of this video told the story of the Salon from its origins to the late 18th century and the French Revolution. This second video continues the history of the Salon from the post-revolutionary era through the 19th century to the final state-run Salon in 1880. In the 19th century, the Salon remained what it had been during the 18th century, but on an ever larger scale. An exhibition of the works of living artists held in Paris, at which paintings, sculptures, and works on paper were shown, and prizes and medals awarded. In almost all cases, the works exhibited were selected by juries, and their decisions remained a constant source of sometimes violent controversy. For most of the 19th century, the Salon took place every 1 or 2 years. It was an important part of the Parisian social calendar, and a high-profile event both nationally and internationally. Its importance to the world of art extended far beyond France. The Salon was not directly commercial in the sense that artists did not sell their work there, and the only direct buyer at the Salon was the French state itself. But, as one of the few ways in which artists could connect directly with the public, it was an event of the highest commercial importance for the artists who took part. For much of the 19th century, it was almost impossible to maintain a career as a successful artist without showing your work at the Salon. The history of the Salon was entwined with the history of the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture and its successors, and its character reflected the tensions between the academic vision of art and the realities of working artists' careers. Those tensions became more marked as the 19th century wore on. Changes not only in artistic taste, but in the ways artists, dealers, and buyers operated, and in the artistic landscape of institutions and exhibitions, challenged the dominance of the Salon and undermined its usefulness and its relevance. The final state-run Salon on the old model took place in 1880. The French government withdrew support after that year, and from 1881 the Salon was run independently of the state by the Société des Artistes Français, and increasingly became just one exhibition among many. Part 1. The Salon in the early 19th century. During the revolutionary era, there had been many wide-ranging changes in the way the arts in France were administered, including, of course, in the running of the Salon. This is dealt with in more detail at the end of the previous video, but in essence the Académie Royale des Peintures et des Sculptures was in 1791 removed from running the Salon, which it had done since the beginning, and in 1793 was abolished altogether. Also in 1791 the Salon, previously restricted to academicians, was thrown open to all, with all privileges and restrictions removed. This started the event on its trajectory of expansion, which would continue throughout the 19th century, making it, by mid-century, the largest artistic exhibition in the world. From 1795, the newly established Institut de France, into which the former academies were absorbed, became responsible for the supervision of artistic activities and the provision of artistic education in France, and for running the Salon. The Baroque building of the Institut de France, the former Collège des Quatre Nations, with its prominent dome, was directly opposite the Louvre on the left bank of the Seine, a location both convenient and richly symbolic. The two sites were linked in physical form from 1804 by the Pont des Arts, depicted in this lovely picture from around 1880 by Jean Béraud. In 1816 there was a further reorganization. The academies concerned with painting and sculpture, architecture and music were brought together in a new Académie des Beaux-Arts, which oversaw the Salon from 1817 onwards and ran, in various forms, the jury system. The ultimate authority over the Salon, and the source of its funding, was the state's fine arts bureaucracy under the Directeur des Beaux-Arts, who answered to the Minister for Public Education. This was the system which had to deal with the 19th century salon's constant expansion, ever more submissions, more exhibitors, and more visitors. This graph shows the numbers of works exhibited at each salon between 1822 and 1880. It is not a smooth progression. Some salons saw a rise in entries compared with the preceding event, others a fall, but the upward trend, particularly from the 1850s, is clear. Attendance similarly increased, encouraged by the fact that there were always days at the salon when admission was free. Records of attendance are not particularly reliable or consistent, but there is no doubt that the salon was becoming more crowded every year, with the attendance of about 100,000 people in 1857 rising to 500,000 in 1880. There are many written accounts of what it was like visiting the crowded salon at this time, and visual depictions as well, showing how overcrowded, hot, and exhausting the experience could be. These satirical lithographs are by Honoré Daumier. As the salon grew in size, the established administrative structures proved increasingly inadequate, and the strain began to show. Part 2. Accommodating the Salon. The problems caused by the growth of the Salon were nowhere clearer than in the attempts to find a suitable venue to accommodate it. For the first half of the 19th century, the Salon continued to take place at the Louvre in its new guise as a national public museum of art rather than a royal palace. The changing status of the Louvre was recorded in its changing names, holding up a mirror to contemporary political changes in France. Musée Central des Arts from 1796 until 1804, when it became Musée Napoléon. With Napoleon's fall, it became Musée Royal des Arts until 1848, when it was renamed Musée National du Louvre. As the Salon grew larger, both in the numbers of exhibitors and artworks and the numbers of visitors, the inadequacies of the Louvre became ever more glaring. This painting by François Billard, which was shown at the Salon of 1847, gives a vivid impression of what it was like visiting the Salon at the Louvre in the 1840s. The galleries heaving with jostling crowds, pictures stacked so high on every wall that many can hardly be seen, the uniformed and famously rude gallery attendants shoving their way through the throng, bawling that the galleries are about to close. The final Salon to be held at the Louvre, that of 1848, was an even more chaotic affair than that shown here, mainly because in that revolutionary year the Salon jury had been abolished, and an unprecedented number of over 5,000 artworks had to be accommodated. In the wake of this debacle, it was decided that the Salon would finally have to be moved out of the Louvre to a more suitable venue. Finding such a venue was not easy, however. Some years of experiment followed as the Salon left the Louvre and wandered around Paris looking for a new home. In 1849, the Salon was held at the Tuileries Palace. In 1850, at the Palais National, the former Palais Royal. In 1852, at the Palais Royal, the former Palais National, and in 1853 at the Hôtel des Menus Plaisirs, the former storage building for royal furnishings, a dark, cramped, and awkwardly located venue which provoked much criticism. Parisians greatly disliked having to leave their bright central boulevards for a gloomy warehouse in, as far as they were concerned, the middle of nowhere. In 1855, the Salon formed a part of the Universal Exposition of that year and took place in the temporary Palais des Beaux-Arts erected for the exhibition. The next Salon was in 1857 and was held in the former Palais de l'Industrie, built for the 1855 exposition, an enormous structure notable for its large interior spaces, which was renamed the Palais des Champs-Élysées. That building remained a venue for the official Salon until 1880, accommodating its expansion to over 7,200 works in that year, and continued to host the subsequent independent Salon until the end of the century. The huge rooms and galleries of the Palais des Champs-Élysées provided much more space for both exhibits and visitors at the Salon, but complaints continued that the event itself was simply too big. That problem was only solved by the fragmentation of the Salon system in the 1880s. Part 3. Rejections and refusés. In 1885, the Austrian artist Felicien Mirbach-Reinfeldt produced a series of illustrations for the periodical Paris Illustré, offering a behind-the-scenes look at the organization of the Paris Salon. Among them was the image for which this is the preparatory drawing, showing salon attendants at work among a vast number of framed works of art, leaning one upon another and filling the room around them. The drawing is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where it is catalogued under the title Candidates for Admission to the Paris Salon. But in fact, it shows the other end of the process. These are failed candidates, which have been rejected by the Salon jury, and will be returned to the artists who submitted them, with large red R's for refusé stamped on the back, as the title of the final illustration makes clear, Graveyard of the Refusés. Since the mid-18th century, submissions to the Salon had been reviewed by juries, who voted on which works to include and which to reject. Disputes over the way juries were appointed or elected, and charges of inconsistency, favoritism, and bias in the way they made their decisions had gone on ever since, but during the 19th century these controversies reached new heights. The bitterest arguments raged over the refusés, the works which the juries rejected. Some salons were notorious for the high number of rejections. In 1827 and 1836, for example, around 40% of the works submitted to the Salon were rejected. In 1840, 1843, and 1847, more than half were rejected. And in 1855, the year in which the Salon was combined with the Universal Exposition, 3/4 of the submissions were rejected. It was in that year of 1855 that Honoré Daumier caricatured the plight of the rejected artist. His upright and confident Marche Triomphale is turned into a slumped and despairing Marche Funèbre by the decisions of the jury. Just as Mirbach-Reinfeldt depicted the graveyard of the refusés, so Daumier showed rejected canvases being borne away like bodies for burial. In the case of the Austrian painter Jules Holtzapfel, the metaphors of death were all too apt. When his work was rejected by the jury for the Salon of 1866, he killed himself. "The members of the jury have rejected me. I therefore have no talent. I must die," he wrote. For artists, for whom in many cases the Salon, whatever they thought of it, was essential to their livelihoods, rejection was a serious matter. In 1869, after the Salon had refused both of his submissions for that year, Claude Monet wrote that the Salon's rejections had left him desperate and had almost taken the bread out of my mouth. In 1863, the Salon jury refused about 2/3 of the submissions for that year's exhibition. This decision is sometimes presented as a deliberately draconian rejection of everything modern and innovative in art, but it was as much the result of new rules on how many works individual artists could submit, and new standards for the exclusion of works judged as being of poor quality, as it was a product of an institutionalized bias, which certainly existed, against certain tendencies in contemporary art. The protests by those rejected, who included Manet, Whistler, Courbet, and Pissarro, and their supporters, led to the setting up of an officially sanctioned Salon des refusés, in which the rejected works were displayed, to be greeted by derisive laughter and ridicule, and which has subsequently been seen as a key event in the history of modern art. But that is a topic for another video. There were more such alternative salons after 1863. and Rejections and the nature of the Salon jury system more generally continued to be sources of controversy until the end of the official Salon in 1880. Indeed, the supposed biases of the Salon juries were cited by ministers of the newly elected Republican government in 1879 as one of the reasons for ending state support for the Salon. Similar disputes affected the Salon's successors. There was a Salon de refusés, for example, in 1886, but once the dominance of the Salon declined and independent exhibitions gradually became more significant, the controversies associated with the Salon and its juries became increasingly irrelevant. Part 4. The Art of the Salon. At the beginning of the century, neoclassicism remained dominant at the Salon, and the primacy of academicism and of history painting endured. But whatever its essential conservatism, the Salon was naturally profoundly affected by the changing stylistic and ideological currents in European art during the 19th century. Art historical narratives have tended to position the Salon as essentially a negative influence, representing reactionary traditionalism and standing against the innovative, even revolutionary developments that marked progress and development in art, most notably perhaps Impressionism from the 1860s onwards. The reality is, as ever, more complicated, although there is a core of truth to this characterization. The Salon was far from static, and itself underwent many changes between the beginning and the end of the 19th century. In the 1820s, it was the conflict between neoclassicism and romanticism, with the rise of painters such as Géricault and Delacroix, that drove Salon debates. In the middle of the century came Courbet, Millet, and the challenge of realism and naturalism, and later still Cézanne, Monet, and the rise of Impressionism. Yet a great variety of art was displayed at the Salon from a wide variety of artists. It is important to remember, for example, the Salon's lack of insularity. As the century went on, the international presence at the Salon became ever more marked, with American, British, Dutch, Swiss, German, Russian, Belgian, Spanish, Italian, Polish, and many other nationalities being represented in this event of global stature. However, the art approved and presented did tend to be unchallenging, in the sense that it did not show anyone anything they had not seen before, nor challenge them with innovations in thematic focus, ideology, or technique, and consequently large swathes of contemporary artistic endeavour found no representation or validation at the Salon, or were consigned to a marginal status. Given the type of event the Salon was, this was perhaps inevitable. Over the years, the Academy, wishing to distance themselves from the commercial aspects of public exhibitions, had reconciled themselves to the Salon by representing it not as an exhibition of art for sale, but a display of art which had been commissioned for public purposes. This had the additional advantage that it privileged the genres of art which the Academy regarded as most elevated, above all, history painting, over forms of art which they did not value so highly, such as portraits and landscapes. These were both genres with which the Impressionists were particularly associated, and this was one reason why their works were neglected or deliberately excluded by the Salon for much of the 1860s and 1870s. The Impressionists were less interested in the grand themes and excuses for the nude which the Salon favoured, consciously selecting everyday themes for their works, and their canvases also tended to be less highly finished than the types of painting favoured by academic Salon artists. This disjuncture between Salon expectations and the realities of artists' work extended beyond the Impressionists, however. The fact was that most artists did not work in history painting, but in the other genres, which offered more patronage, more of a market, in short, more chance of making a name and a living. There was thus always a tension between what artists wanted from the Salon and what the Academy wanted, a tension that was ultimately irreconcilable and which would contribute to the decline of the Salon system in the latter half of the 19th century. Part 5. Conclusion. Why did the Salon end? The first part of this video began with a quote from Renoir, rejecting the idea of exhibiting at an independent exhibition and explaining why he remained committed to the Salon. The quote comes from a letter which Renoir wrote to his dealer, Paul Durand-Ruel, in 1882, after the end of the official Salon. Renoir is referring to the successor Salon, run by the Société des Artistes Français, but the fact that he makes the argument he does after the official Salon had ceased to operate emphasizes an important point about the ending of the Salon, that the Salon did not end. The state-run Salon ended after 1880, when a government committed to a free market in the arts decided to withdraw state support for an event which was also becoming increasingly oversized and unsatisfactory to all who took part in it, from the jury members to the visiting public. But nobody at the time saw this as the end of the Salon. The assumption was that the Salon would continue. The questions were about what form it would take and who would run it. But the status of the new Salon was very different from the old. It was no longer a singular and dominant institution, the central event for artists and the artistic market, an event which no artist could ignore and to which there were no alternatives. This transformation, as Renoir's words make clear, did not happen overnight, but was a gradual process that played out throughout the 1880s and 1890s. The Salon had originally developed in a particularly French artistic ecosystem, in which art dealers were almost unknown. Art criticism was a pursuit restricted to a small elite, and in which, because of the academic aversion to associating art with the artisanal business of making and selling, it was frowned upon for artists to exhibit or to sell directly to the public. This was a model which was steadily undermined during the 19th century, partly as a result of the Salon's own success in stimulating the growth of modern art criticism and the profession of the art critic. The huge expansion in print media in the 19th century and ever-improving means for the mechanical reproduction of images, allied to a proliferation of art criticism, created an artistically informed public, including a growing constituency of the moneyed middle classes who were an increasingly important market for art themselves. Artists increasingly engaged with this public outside the restrictions of the Salon system, either directly or through art dealers. Between the post-revolutionary era in the early 19th century and the demise of the official Salon after 1880, the art world changed and diversified hugely, in styles, techniques, and technologies, and in markets, professions, and institutions. The Salon, in many ways, provided the framework within which these changes occurred, but that framework was too restrictive to allow the Salon itself to adapt successfully to the artistic environment around it. The Salon gradually lost its authority as artists withdrew from it, rejecting what they saw as its conservative character and unsatisfactory organization for smaller events which served as better shop windows for their work, the increasingly numerous and increasingly diverse independent exhibitions. The Salon was important, and remained so, but in this new environment it could no longer be dominant.